Forgotten true crime cases that deserve justice. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia. The air was cold, the sky clear, and the Sodder family home glowed with the warmth of celebration. George and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants, hardworking, proud, and devoted parents of 10 children. That night, they gathered around the living room, laughter echoing, wrapping paper torn apart, and the faint scent of pine mixing with coal smoke from the fireplace. But by dawn, that laughter would turn into screams. At around 12:30 a.m., Jenny awoke to the sound of the phone ringing. She stumbled through the dark hallway, half asleep, and answered. A woman's voice she didn't recognize spoke, calm, almost rehearsed. "Is this the residence of the Sodders?" Jenny confirmed. Then the woman laughed softly and said, "You've got the wrong number." Behind her, Jenny heard clinking glasses and distant laughter, like a party in the background. The call ended abruptly. Jenny placed the receiver down, unaware that this was the last normal moment her family would ever have. Minutes later, she noticed something else strange. The front door was unlocked, and the lights were still on. Her eldest sons, who were supposed to close up the house after the party, hadn't done so. The curtains were open, and the room felt unsettled, as if someone had been there and left in a hurry. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and went back to bed. At 1 a.m., she woke again, this time to a sharp, rolling sound on the roof. A loud thud, then silence. Before she could investigate, the smell hit her, thick, choking smoke. The house was on fire. Jenny screamed for her husband, George. He bolted up, realizing flames were already spreading through the hallway. He ran to the staircase, yelling for the children, but the steps were engulfed. 5 of them, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny Jr., and Betty, were trapped upstairs. Chaos erupted. 2 of the older boys managed to escape through a window, glass shattering against the cold night. The younger children, sleeping in the attic, never came down. The family tried everything. George smashed a window, slicing open his arm. He tried to climb to the upper floor, but the fire was too intense. He ran to grab his ladder, the one he always kept against the side of the house. But it was gone. Vanished. He sprinted to his trucks, parked nearby, planning to drive one under the window to climb up. Neither of them would start. Both had worked perfectly earlier that day. In desperation, the family screamed for help, but the nearby phone lines were dead. Someone had cut them. By the time neighbors arrived, the Sodder home was a roaring inferno. The night sky glowed orange against the Appalachian Hills. Firefighters from Fayetteville's small volunteer unit arrived at dawn, hours too late. When the flames finally died, the 2-story house had collapsed into itself, reduced to smoking embers and ash. Then came the unexplainable part. No remains were found. No bones. No traces of the 5 missing children. The fire chief told the Sodders it was likely the heat had completely cremated their bodies. But scientists later confirmed that was impossible. Even crematoriums, which burn hotter and longer than house fires, still leave fragments of bone. George refused to accept it. "They didn't burn," he said. "They were taken." As investigators combed through the ashes, strange clues began to surface. In the rubble, they found a small pile of metal, something resembling parts of a telephone line. It looked as if it had been deliberately torn down. A few feet away, a rubber object melted into the soil, later identified as the remains of a napalm-like bomb casing. Jenny remembered the loud thud she'd heard on the roof just before the fire. Could someone have thrown it? The family began receiving phone calls, each one more chilling than the last. One caller claimed the children were alive, being held by strangers who wanted to teach George a lesson. Another said they'd been taken to Italy. And then came the most disturbing moment of all. Months later, while visiting the site where their home once stood, Jenny noticed something buried in the dirt, a small vertebra, perfectly preserved. Investigators dismissed it, claiming it belonged to an adult male. But George and Jenny knew no one else had been buried there. The townspeople whispered theories. Insurance fraud. Revenge for George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini. A child trafficking ring. The town sheriff brushed it all aside, insisting it was a tragic accident. But one morning, George received a letter in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his 20s, dark hair, piercing eyes. On the back, someone had written in neat handwriting, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Lil boys. A 90132 or 35. The photo looked like their missing son, Louis. Same jawline, same smile. But the note made no sense. Who sent it? Was Louis alive? Or was this a cruel joke from someone who knew too much? George stood in silence, staring at the photo under the dim light of his desk lamp. Something deep in his gut told him the truth. This case wasn't over. Someone had wanted the Sodder children gone, and they'd planned it long before the fire. But when he decided to reopen the case on his own, a new discovery would change everything, and it was buried just beneath the ashes of what used to be their home. By 1946, the ashes of the Sodder home had long cooled, but the mystery burned hotter than ever. Fayetteville had tried to move on. The wreckage was cleared, the winter grass began to grow again, and the once bustling mining town returned to its rhythm. But for George and Jenny Sodder, every morning began with the same haunting question: where are our children? They rebuilt a small two-room house on the same property. But instead of living in it peacefully, they turned it into something between a home and a shrine. On one wall hung a giant billboard, stark black letters on white. 5 children missing, after fire destroyed home, December 24, 1945. Below it were photographs of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny Jr., and Betty. Wide smiles, bright eyes, frozen in time. George changed the photographs regularly to keep them from fading. He wired the billboard with spotlights so it could be seen even at night by travelers passing through Route 16. He didn't care that people called him obsessed. "If I stop," he told a local reporter, "then they win." And for George, they wasn't some abstract mystery. He believed someone planned that fire, that the blaze was only a distraction to cover up a kidnapping. There were reasons to believe him. Witnesses began to come forward, people who had seen things that night but hadn't spoken up out of fear. A bus driver who passed the Sodder home around 1:30 a.m. claimed he saw people throwing balls of fire onto the roof. Another woman who lived near the town claimed she saw a group of men in a car watching the house as it burned, their faces illuminated by the flames. And then there was the waitress from a cafe between Fayetteville and Charleston. She told police that around dawn on Christmas morning, just hours after the fire, she served breakfast to 5 children accompanied by 2 adults. The adults refused to let the children speak and looked anxious. The children appeared frightened. One of the girls had soot on her hands. Her description of the children matched the missing Sodder kids. When investigators followed up, the cafe couldn't produce records of the order. Too many customers that morning, the owner said. Conveniently, the witness couldn't recall the make of the car they left in. George's frustration grew with every dead end. "Every time we find a clue," he said, "someone shuts a door." Then came a chilling development. A man who had worked for the local telephone company came forward. He said the Sodders' phone line hadn't been cut by fire, as officials claimed, it had been deliberately snipped. He found the severed wire more than 14 feet off the ground. The only way to reach it would have been with a ladder. And remember that missing ladder George couldn't find that night? A neighbor later discovered it, tossed into a nearby embankment, 75 feet away. The clues painted a disturbing picture. Someone had climbed up, cut the phone line, possibly thrown an incendiary device onto the roof, and then vanished before the fire took hold. For what? Some whispered it had to do with George's outspoken political views. He was fiercely anti-Mussolini and had clashed with other Italian immigrants in Fayetteville who supported the fascist regime. He'd even received threats. One insurance salesman warned him that if he didn't keep quiet, his house would burn and his children would be destroyed. George threw him off the property, and weeks later, the fire happened. The man who made that threat was questioned but never charged. Police claimed there wasn't enough evidence. As months turned into years, more strange coincidences piled up. A woman in St. Louis sent a letter saying she overheard 2 men discussing a fire in West Virginia where children were taken. Another tip came from Florida. Someone claimed to have seen the youngest girl, Betty, living with a new family. Yet every lead led nowhere. Still, the Sodders refused to give up. They hired private investigators. One of them, a man named C.C. Tinsley, began digging into the fire chief's involvement. He uncovered something startling. The fire chief had quietly buried a small piece of evidence he'd found at the scene, a heart-shaped organ. When Tinsley confronted him, the chief admitted he buried it to spare the family more pain. The organ was exhumed and sent for testing. The result? It wasn't human, it was a beef liver, likely planted after the fire. Who would bury a fake organ and pretend it belonged to a missing child? The deception was too deliberate to be a mistake. By 1949, George and Jenny demanded a full reinvestigation. The state reluctantly agreed to reopen the case. A new search of the site uncovered a handful of bone fragments, charred but still identifiable. Forensic experts determined they belonged to someone aged 16 to 22, older than any of the missing Sodder children. The bones also showed no fire damage. They hadn't been burned at all. It was as if someone placed them there later. When the governor and state police refused to pursue the case further, the Sodders realized the horrifying truth: no one in authority wanted answers. So they took matters into their own hands. George traveled across the country, showing the photograph of the young man, the one sent anonymously, believed to be Lewis. Every town he stopped in, every diner, every bus stop, he'd hold it up and ask, "Do you know this boy?" He spent his savings, aged decades in just a few years, and became a man haunted by a single purpose: to bring his children home. Jenny, meanwhile, began to wear only black, every day for the rest of her life. She said she'd mourn them until she knew the truth. But in the 1950s, the mystery took an even darker turn. A letter arrived addressed to George. No return address, no sender's name, just a single photograph inside. The same young man from before, older this time. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing eyes. And once again, scrawled on the back in faint pencil, "Lewis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Illo boys." A 90132 or 35. George's hands trembled. It wasn't a dream. Someone out there was taunting them or trying to tell them the truth. But who? And why now? One thing was clear. Whatever happened to those children on that cold Christmas Eve night, it hadn't ended in fire. Something much more human and far darker had taken them. And as the next clue surfaced years later, buried deep in the mountains of West Virginia, the Sodders would learn just how far the shadows of that night truly reached.